Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have John Frechette with us. John is founder at Sourced Economics in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. He's rethinking the economics of business. This pod is brought to you by podpire.com. If you want to start and scale and monetize your own podcast, go to podpire.com. John, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. Really excited to be on the podcast. What I'm up to nowadays is really grinding away, like you are, I think, at trying to build a business. Yes, our company is Sourced Economics. We are actually doing many things, but mostly we are working with a range of kind of departments within very large organizations, namely, consumer products and manufacturing companies and mining companies. So lots of different industrial businesses to bring to them what we'd like to think is another layer of pretty advanced research. In particular, we sort of bill ourselves as building the bridge between formal economics and the business community. And so what that means is doing a lot of I'd like to think very advanced econometric modeling, doing really leaning into academic research and bringing, for example, the empirical findings from that research to a business audience. And so in the process, I'd like to think we are, really disrupting a couple different industries, which provide some context. Market research is one of them, and another would be kind of management consulting. And so, yes, pretty early stage, but we're about a couple years in. We've been very fortunate to build a research team and a pretty solid book of business of clients, but it is all still completely up in the air and definitely in startup mode. And I think we will be for years, frankly. Yeah.
How did you first get started?
So in terms of the idea just kind of came about through a combination of experiences, obviously working in consulting and then studying in economics, getting a graduate degree in economics, and just kind of thinking critically about how those worlds come together. But specifically, then how we got started was it was myself and a group of about 3 university professors that. So actually, the very first thing I did was get on the line with a bunch of different university professors. That was kind of the first discovery I did. So probably 15 different economists and get their feedback. And then there were a few that really agreed to give some time and work with me on business development and whatnot. And so we started probably similar to how you started with just doing cold outreach. So for about 3 months after, in March 2022, it started. For about 3 months, didn't have any clients, cold calling, 100 calls a day, something like that, doing a lot of cold emailing, LinkedIn. And then we were fortunate, picked up a project, and then another one, and then another one. And you could say things have snowballed. It hasn't been really a very smooth curve, pretty noisy. Bringing on new clients and revenue kind of comes in waves, but nonetheless, we've been fortunate to have some success. But yes, all started with cold outreach. Yep.
Interesting. And how is the transition between corporate to the founder world? Because you started at EY. How was it for you to start your own business and take care of everything all at once?
I think it all depends on what type of role you have within a large organization. That determines how prepared you are to jump into a startup. Obviously, there's no real preparing. You don't know what you're getting into, but nonetheless, I was fortunate at EY. I worked in a couple different departments. In the first department I worked in, it was really good experience, and you learned a lot. It was in internal audit, doing some accounting. But then I was fortunate for a few years, and at the tail end of my time at EY, I actually worked in what would be called maybe like let's say a highly entrepreneurial role, where it was kind of pretty broad portfolio that I was working on. Worked on a lot of different deals, business development, and I had a lot of freedom, let's say, to go out and do tons of outreach and try to drum up opportunities and then work on projects. Now, the big difference, Charles, is that at a company like EY, go to market usually means selling to the partners and selling to internal stakeholders before actually getting to clients. And then, when you go out on your own, obviously you're just completely in the world by yourself to some extent. You're kind of in the abyss and reaching out cold. So it's actually, I have to say, maybe the one word I might use to describe it is actually liberating. Um, but I was sort of prepared for it, thanks to the role I was in previously.
And nowadays, like, tell me about how you sell to whom.
How we sell it ain't so different from how we sold 2 years ago, right? Other than maybe I'm doing less of the sales myself. Having said that, I still call and email. I made, 50 calls today or something like that. But it is, I had a business development. I have his name is Seth Watson, by the way. He is doing a lot of the selling, and it's the same type of thing, albeit more disciplined. He has done a really good job of injecting a lot of discipline and consistency in our sales campaigns. But it is reaching out to mostly vice presidents, let's say directors and above, of three different specific teams. Strategy is one of, another would be commercial excellence. And then the last would be some kind of catch-all to cover something like customer insights or market insights. Really what we're looking for, Charles, are individuals within organizations that have the mandate and power to procure and use research. And so sometimes that is actually internal research teams, and sometimes it's just teams that have a great appetite for research. Again, like those strategy professional, big part of their job is sourcing analytics and then presenting them to leadership groups within companies and whatnot. So yes, those are the people we're reaching out to, and they're long sales cycles, quite involved deal processes, high touch, really relationship based, and that's the nature of the game. That's the business we're in.
And is there like specific verticals that you target? And tell me about the cold outreach that you send.
Well, good question. I think, when I started the business, I really figured that once you maybe win a project in a certain industry, then you could really leverage that and build off of it. Turns out that does not necessarily, in my experience, increase reply rates all that much, having a specific case study within a specific industry to talk about. So it is still a broad group of industries that we're reaching out to. But if I had to just bucket a few, we do a lot of work in the automotive space nowadays, both with kind of automakers, but also with all of their upstream suppliers, tier one and tier two suppliers. And by extension, Charles, lots of work, just what I'd call in industrial manufacturing and mining and metals. Um, you know, pretty pretty much right off the bat, I had recognized that financial services, for instance, was not a good market for us because they have lots of economists on staff, and you have to really kind of divide labor well and substantially to have some internal team members that are focused almost entirely on, for instance, the models and literature used in asset pricing or something like that. So outside of some exceptions, we don't do financial services, we don't do professional services. Pretty much outside of those, we don't, do any public sector work. Outside of those, it is a very, very broad brush we paint. Um, yeah,
So
so it's
what are your
interesting.
top goals this year as the founder?
Top goals this year. I mean, we do have some, specific targets. Most of them are, I take it back. It's a combination of sales related and client related goals. On the sales front, Charles, it's obviously just about bringing in new accounts, and in fact, kind of at all costs, increasing our quantity. It just diversifying the accounts that we work with is obviously a big part of it. But I'll tell you, the most interesting part of our jobs is, the research itself is interesting, but then when you're working with very large companies, the process to actually affect change is really, really difficult and unstructured and varies by account. So, I'll tell you what we'd love, and it's kind of an abstract goal, but we really want to, just I'd say, for instance, integrate be able to integrate some of our models into some business as usual processes, whether it be, procurement processes or sales and marketing efforts or something related. And that's a tough thing to do. You've got a lot of established processes, types of communications, types of assumptions, hypotheses, calculations, and they're very sticky. And we work hard to sort of disrupt those, but it takes time. So that would be a big thing, become just more integral with the accounts where we're engaged.
Interesting. And the research, what have you found out lately about the state of the economy or economic facts that are relevant to startups and tech companies?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And I'd say, funny enough, one that I'm fairly ill prepared to respond to, only because I'll put it bluntly and say that we do mostly microeconomics. We don't do all that much macroeconomics. Uh, Having said that, I honestly feel like the unique data points I have on this front don't necessarily come from our economic research skills or something, but actually, just from calling and selling into the markets we're operating in. So probably some similar signals that you have. And whereas, on the macro front, the macro data looks optimistic. The one exception maybe is, those not to get technical, but just when I do kind of wade into the macro side of things, the yield spreads between long-term and short-term interest rates, inverse yield curves seem to me to be such an unbelievable leading indicator for recessions or downturns. And the last I checked, and as far as I know, those are still flashing red to some extent. So that is definitely a concern. But on the topic of startups in the startup environment in the markets where we're operating, I don't know if you have seen the same, but definitely lots of individuals that seem to be saying things like our budgets are locked, or we're cutting budgets for the upcoming year, or we're not bringing in new vendors or something like that. And so obviously the takeaway for startups, are manyfold, but the two I have in mind are trying to really organize your pitch around some sort of counter-cyclical features and value aspects of your value proposition that are a little bit resilient to economic cycles, such as helping with cost savings, for instance. And then the other is just playing the long game, recognizing that the sales conversations you have today might probably pay dividends down the line, but your expected close dates maybe shouldn't be as optimistic as they are, I guess, is another takeaway. I don't know. Have you seen the same? Have you had the same experience or no?
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, these are called the sales cycles. So drastically stretched this year. By drastic, I mean 30%, even 50 in some instances, which is pretty long, right? Like if you're selling
Sure.
a product with an existing 120 sales cycle, then that's 180 now. And yeah, that's pretty long and it's pretty dramatic. It destabilizes the salespeople as well because they expect a shorter sales cycle. And yeah, like people are less trigger happy nowadays. I think
Yeah.
the close rate is also lower. I'm not sure how many people think like myself, but I fired like my full team 2 years ago when this whole thing started. And yesterday I posted about YC letter, which mentions the default alive state. You know that people should reread. I posted about it on my LinkedIn yesterday, and I think we're still in that phase right now. And that says a lot. I mean, I haven't hired any humans in 2 years. I'm not sure how many people also did that. So what are you doing on your side to sort of keep on surviving and thriving?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. The best thing you could do is strengthen, or I take it back. One big part of it is strengthening client relationships. There's, no doubt about that. We have had to make some tough sacrifices, though. Not only literally in kind of line item budget cuts, um, but also just ensuring that, for instance, a little bit less time is focused on my end on sales activities, a little more on client relationships and whatnot. And so I think those are the big things. Now, in terms of I think part of what you were getting at had to do with we're certainly trying to streamline things internally as much as possible. And to that end, we do use, we are certainly power users of, for instance, ChatGPT and all of its extensions. And the only other thing I'd say, Charles, is to deal in this environment, we have really worked hard to come up with a more flexible set of commercial models that might fit in better with sort of our client situations. And it hasn't been as effective as we'd like. We for instance, we always felt like our deals were all or nothing. Either there's some huge project and it's a transformative project we're going to work on together, or there was like no other option. And so we introduced, starting in 2024, some lower tier packages, and they're, covering things like just really kind of rapid fire literature reviews is an example. And we use obviously a combination of tools to do this. Super cheap subscription model. You get a couple of those a month. Though that's how we're trying to get creative. And there's been certainly some interest, but it's not as effective as we'd like. And part of that, by the way, is because the customers that we sell to, just there are some different kind of demand variables they're working against. It's not really obviously just about are we 10, or even in my view sometimes 50% cheaper than their existing research providers. There's other stuff. There's the opportunity cost of time. There's trying to putting out your reputation to go to procurement and try to get a transaction done, all sorts of things. So yeah, it's a tough environment, but I'd like to think we're actually doing pretty well on it, by getting creative, let's say.
Love that. I love the micro product idea that you suggested. I also did that, and that just makes sense, right? Like, and the irony on my side is that I've been increasing my prices on a month-to-month basis since like the past 6 to 12 months, but I think I reached some form of elasticity lately, or at least with the folks that I'm targeting, right? So I think there needs to be an equilibrium there. And I was like, okay, why don't I offer something that's more affordable for people to just get a taste of what I do? So that's a smart move to make, I think, during these quote unquote recessions where people are less happy to spend on your product. I think it's relevant also to explore other forms of outreach and really A/B test at scale. Having a system like Apollo to send a bunch of emails, but podcasting can be a good source as well. Get a bunch of views, you get nice referrals, you grow your network. You have a newsletter on your backend to support that and generate more sales. Yeah, new industry, I must guess it's pretty long sales cycle since you're selling to literally Fortune 500s. Have you thought of selling to smaller businesses?
We certainly have tested it. We've tested everything. And we certainly tested that towards the beginning, small, medium-sized businesses. And it's on the surface, it is an attractive idea, which is that you're sort of pitching to companies that don't have large internal economics departments. To be fair, there are many companies that you wouldn't call small, medium-sized business that also don't have large economics departments. But obviously that increases in the extent of which, sure, as you go further down. Now, here's the main problem, though, Charles, is that sort of fundamentally the where we can really add value is with some very sort of technical, very again, I'd like to think advanced, uh, basically data and analytics, or sort of sometimes people describe it as really making some surgical improvements, whether that be again in their how they develop their products, or how they price their products, or how they go about setting up their contracts to purchase commodities. And you just don't have that type of appetite with a small company whose executives are really focused more on operating. Um, and so it hasn't really worked out because, the other thing is when it comes to the macro stuff, yes, we do get involved in macro because we're engaged. We have a great team that knows economics. We know how to sort through the crap, let's say, that's out there. But for someone like the CEO of a 200 employee company, um, a newsletter that's sent out weekly is probably for basically nothing. A free newsletter gets you exactly the amount of information you need on the macroeconomy. So it's a great idea, hasn't panned out, and I think it'll be a long time before that's a good market for us. Yeah.
Interesting. The challenges you faced as an entrepreneur in the past couple of years, how do you face them psychologically?
Ooh, I mean, it's a good question. I think once you have a team, and I know you're in a little bit of a different situation, but once you have a team, that's a lot of accountability, and that certainly motivates you and sort of hopefully helps to keep me level-headed, though it doesn't always work. But then the other thing I'd say, Charles, is that I mean, it's a little bit philosophical, but the way I look at work and the importance I place on work as my sort of contribution to the world and my recognition of, let's say, how fortunate I am. I think all of those things combine to uh, give me some motivation. But obviously, but it's not always the case, right? There are plenty of weeks where you're really upset and frustrated, and so it's not an even keel. I mean, it seems to me like being an entrepreneur is just like peaks and valleys. You close the deal and it's the greatest day of your life, besides for my wedding, or you lose the deal and it's just horrible, a very horrible feeling, or you have a bad day of cold calling. That's also tough. So I won't pretend like I'm so good at being resilient. But if I am, it's just because of a combination of things. How about you?
Cold calling can be really tough. I started my career
Yeah.
doing 200 a day, and I'm not sure if that relevance anymore, other than if you're in a really bad situation, like if it's do or die. But if it's do or die, it's gonna work all the time. Um, hmm.
Depends on your market, right?
Yeah, I mean, for calling Fortune 500, fuck, that's hard, man. So kudos to you if you still do that.
Yep.
How I deal psychologically with it, I rarely have bad days nowadays. Sometimes like once per quarter, I'll have a bad day, like everything is fucking going wrong, personally, professionally. The dogs don't listen to me, and everything strikes all at once. I feel like shit. The stomach's not feeling well. I'm sick. Whatever. Um, I guess, like my number one tip is just rolling by. It's just like when I do ultra races or Ironmans, I mean, at some point you just go through it. It's not necessarily about like, yeah, I think it's just like transporting yourself on a third perspective and just observing your little self and be like, okay, yeah, he's going through stuff. You'll just keep on going and you just stretch the time. You'll understand that reality is not really the present. It's what in these instances it's about the amalgamation of all these little experiences put together, which is true, right? If you remember last year, do you remember last year in like one specific moment in which you were in deep suffering? No, you remember it in general terms. Okay, this happened, that happened. And if you're anything of a positive bias, you remember the good stuff. So that's pretty much what I do, but I like to modify my biochemistry as well and go for walks under the sun, do a breath work, biohack myself, go do a tough workout, change his biochemistry to just flip the switch. I think that's what I do.
I don't do enough of those types of things. I do run a good amount, and I've done half marathons. I'm going to do my first marathon this year, but I don't get enough sleep, and I don't. I think I don't do a good job of, for instance, time boxing and taking breaks, and so those are some things I could do better. I mean, yeah, it's really interesting. I do think sometimes it feels like every sort of minute you're not motivated to the point where it feels like you're sort of moving mountains and really shocking the markets that you're operating in. It feels like you're kind of standing still. Sometimes that's unfortunately my thought process, rather than recognizing that it's sort of a daily war of attrition. And so I sometimes frustrate myself in that way. Maybe my expectations are a little bit unrealistic there. But
I think
nonetheless,
on the contrary, I think you're very realistic.
yeah.
Like a business, I mean, you have so much competition, right? You have freaks like me. I mean, we don't compete against one another, but me, I'm crunching 16 hours days in a constant biooptimal state, and I'm very fucking smart. I work hard, I work long. So you're competing against like a very tough market. Everyone is, and if you don't invest stuff in your business, it literally dies in the matter of days most of the time. Um, I mean, yeah, that's like the reality, but think if you can find like micro hacks here and there to really build on stuff that is low competition and high demand. For example, I'm on two affiliate systems nowadays. Looks pretty smart. Apart from the system that I run that you already know, right? Lead gen that gives me a bunch of leads on a daily basis. Then I advise some startups so that they give me shares, and these shares might be worth multiple millions in 5 to 10 years, So I think it's about getting candy to your brain as well, right? It's like, oh, I'm doing that. I have this quote unquote nest egg. I'm getting better on a daily basis. I'm taking care of myself. So, but yeah, it is
Yeah.
hard. And I think you need to enjoy the harshness of it. It's like, it's a fucking arena, right? And you're in with gladiators. Some people nowadays, they do that quite literally. I mean, UFC fighters, right? They have a tough job. Every Saturday, they need to show up in front of millions and knock each other out, So,
Yeah.
it's hard.
It's funny that though it often feels like, and what maybe it's doubly as frustrating, it doesn't feel like I'm, sure, we certainly have competitors, but most often we're competing against other things. We're competing against, for instance, established long-term contracts with existing providers. We're competing against information constraints. We're competing against very risk averse sort of corporate cultures or something similar. And so that is, it really does feel a little bit different. Like we can scream at the top of our lungs, but you've still got all of these kind of not physical, but some type of barriers. And it's of course not pure competition, but nonetheless, that's kind of the name of the game. And in the way I looked at this from the beginning is there are unfortunately, some pretty big time barriers to entry in these types of markets. And if we can really go through the painful effort of uh, um, getting some share and making our way into them, then it's a good place to be for a business. So, um, but that's not what we talk about, obviously, on a day-to-day basis. We're talking about getting things done and how can we close this deal and how can we get this report done. So, a little bit different than your typical environment. But anyways, it's fascinating place to be.
Yeah, and sometimes these frustrations, me, I call them pent up, like pent up energy. Um, you just take them and it's David Goggins called these cookies, he puts cookies in the cookie jar. These defeats, these L's, these frustrations. Like yesterday, Calendly banned me for no fucking reason. All right. That's pent up energy for me. That's more energy for the micro wars that I'm waging. So that's yeah, that's like how
Oh
you
yeah,
convert testosterone into productive stuff, sort of.
and it makes it worth it. There's no doubt. I don't want to give the impression it certainly makes it worth it. It's when you have a good presentation to a client, or you find out something really fascinating, or you land a new account. It makes it worth it, and that's what we're working towards. Yep.
There you go. Well, John, where can people find out more about you?
So my LinkedIn is definitely the best place. I've tried many different, social media sites. So LinkedIn is the best place. John Frechette, JOHN FRECHETTE. And then if people want to, they can reach out, John at sourcedeconomics.com.